At 11:55 last night, in an emergency injunction filed with the D.C. District Court, the Securities and Exchange Commission did something unprecedented. They ordered a private tech company to freeze every decentralized cryptocurrency wallet on its network, surrender the master cryptographic keys to federal authorities, and halt all peer-to-peer transfers immediately. The target was Elon Musk's newly launched XPay system, a decentralized payment network that allows users to hold and transfer digital assets without bank intermediaries. The justification cited in the order was national security. The real reason, buried in the technical language and legal code, is that traditional banks are hemorrhaging deposits, and the federal government is preparing to lock the exits. At 1:12 this morning, Musk responded. Not through lawyers, not through carefully crafted press releases, but through a direct post on X that has now been viewed 47 million times. His message was simple and devastating. He stated that XPay operates on a fully decentralized architecture where the company does not hold user private keys, which means he could not freeze accounts even if he wanted to comply. He dared federal authorities to physically raid the server farms if they wanted control. And he closed with 6 words that confirm what everyone paying attention already knows. The fiat system is dying. Subscribe to this channel immediately, because what I am about to walk you through is not the political theater you see on mainstream media. This is the exact mechanism of how the system is breaking. This is the federal government attempting to prevent Americans from moving their money out of a collapsing banking system by criminalizing the alternative. And this is Elon Musk, for all his flaws and erratic behavior, forcing the government to admit what they have been denying for months. They are preparing for capital controls. Turn on notifications, set them to all, because the next 48 hours will redefine the markets. When the SEC issues an emergency midnight order to freeze decentralized wallets, citing national security, and the person they are targeting says, "Come and try to take them," we are no longer in a regulatory dispute. We are in the opening phase of a war between centralized financial control and financial sovereignty. And what happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether Americans retain the ability to move their wealth without government permission. Here is what happened minute by minute from last night through this morning, because the sequence reveals not just what Musk did, but why the SEC panicked. At 8:34 p.m. on Friday, XPay processed its largest single-day transaction volume since launching 3 weeks ago. Over $2.7 billion in digital asset transfers, representing approximately 340,000 individual transactions. For context, when XPay launched on February 1st, daily volume was around $400 million. By February 10th, it had grown to $800 million. By February 20th, $1.4 billion, and yesterday, $2.7 billion. The growth curve is exponential, and more importantly, the transaction pattern reveals something the government finds terrifying. These are not speculative crypto traders. These are ordinary Americans moving money from traditional bank accounts into self-custody digital wallets that banks cannot freeze, governments cannot seize, and the Federal Reserve cannot debase through money printing. At 9:17 p.m., the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control flagged the XPay transaction volume spike to the SEC's Division of Enforcement. The internal communication, which was leaked to financial media this morning, stated that the velocity and scale of capital outflows from traditional banking into decentralized systems represents a potential systemic risk to financial stability. Translation: people are running from the banks, and if this continues, the banks collapse. At 10:03 p.m., the SEC's enforcement director convened an emergency conference call with the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, and the Justice Department. The topic was not whether XPay was violating securities laws. The topic was how to stop the exodus. According to sources on the call, 3 options were discussed. Option 1, request voluntary compliance from Musk to implement Know Your Customer regulations and freeze suspicious accounts. Option 2, file a civil enforcement action and seek a judicial order. Option 3, invoke national security emergency powers and demand immediate cessation of operations pending review. The problem with option 1 is that Musk has already stated publicly that XPay is designed as a permissionless system where the company does not have the ability to freeze user funds. The problem with option 2 is that litigation takes months, and capital flight is happening now. So they chose option 3. At 11:47 p.m., SEC attorneys finalized the emergency injunction. The document is 47 pages, but the operative language is on page 3. Quote, X Corp is hereby ordered to immediately suspend all peer-to-peer decentralized ledger transfers, freeze user funds, and surrender master cryptographic keys to federal authorities. That language reveals the government's fundamental misunderstanding of how decentralized systems work, or their deliberate attempt to criminalize them, despite understanding perfectly well. There are no master cryptographic keys. In a properly designed, decentralized wallet system, each user controls their own private keys. The company operating the infrastructure does not have access to user funds. The SEC is ordering Musk to do something that is technically impossible, which means the real purpose of the order is not compliance. The real purpose is to establish legal grounds for shutting down the network entirely and prosecuting Musk if he resists. At 11:55 p.m., the injunction was filed with the D.C. District Court. At 12:17 a.m., X Corp's legal team was formally served. At 12:34 a.m., Musk was briefed. And at 1:12 a.m., he responded publicly. His post on X stated, "We don't hold your keys. We couldn't freeze your money even if we wanted to. If the feds want the servers, they will have to break down the doors. The fiat system is dying." Hit that like button right now if you understand what just happened. Musk did not hire lawyers to negotiate. He did not issue a corporate statement promising cooperation. He told 200 million followers that the government is trying to seize control of a decentralized network and that he will not comply voluntarily. The algorithm decides what breaks through. You decide whether this analysis reaches people who need to see it. Because what I am showing you is the exact moment a tech billionaire chose to fight the federal government rather than become a tool of financial repression. At 1:47 a.m., the Justice Department issued a statement through a spokesperson. They characterized Musk's refusal to comply with a lawful court order as obstruction and warned that failure to cooperate would result in criminal referral. They did not address his claim that the company lacks the technical ability to freeze decentralized wallets. They simply stated that non-compliance is illegal. At 2:23 a.m., Musk posted again. He stated that XPay server infrastructure is distributed across multiple jurisdictions, including Texas, Nevada, and 3 international locations that he did not specify. He noted that even if federal agents raided US-based servers, the network would continue operating from backup nodes. And he encouraged users to secure their recovery seed phrases, which are the cryptographic keys that allow wallet access, because XPay does not store them centrally. That post was not bravado. That was Musk telling users that the government cannot shut down the network by seizing servers, and that users need to take custody of their own keys now before any potential infrastructure disruption. He is preparing for a raid. At 3:15 a.m., SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, who had been silent until this point, posted on X in what appears to be a coordinated response. He stated that decentralized finance platforms that facilitate securities transactions must comply with federal law. He argued that XPay is effectively operating as an unregistered securities exchange, and that Musk's refusal to implement compliance measures endangers investors. He concluded by stating that the SEC will use all available enforcement tools to protect the public. That statement is revealing because it exposes the government's legal strategy. They are not arguing that XPay is facilitating crime or terrorism, which would be the expected national security justification. They are arguing that it is an unregistered securities exchange. Why? Because securities law gives the SEC broad authority to demand compliance measures, including customer identification, transaction monitoring, and account freezing. If they can classify XPay as a securities platform, they can force centralization even if the underlying technology is decentralized. Drop a comment right now. Tell me if you think Musk should comply with the SEC or if the government is overreaching. I am reading every response because this question will define financial freedom for the next decade. Now, let me show you what is actually happening beneath the headlines and why the government is terrified. XPay is not the first decentralized payment network. Bitcoin has existed for 17 years. Ethereum for 11 years. Dozens of other cryptocurrencies offer peer-to-peer transactions without intermediaries. But XPay is different in 3 critical ways. First, it has instant mainstream adoption because it is integrated directly into the X platform, which has over 500 million active users globally. Second, it is designed specifically for payments and everyday transactions, not speculation. The user interface is as simple as Venmo or Cash App. You can send money to anyone with an X account using their username. Third, and most importantly, Musk designed it with non-custodial architecture from day one, meaning users control their own keys, and X Corp cannot freeze accounts even under legal pressure. That third feature is what makes this a systemic threat in the government's view. Every other major payment platform, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, traditional banks, operates with custodial control. The company holds your funds. If the government orders them to freeze your account, they comply. If the IRS demands transaction records, they provide them. If law enforcement suspects illegal activity, they halt transfers. The entire modern financial system is built on the assumption that there is always an intermediary who can be compelled to enforce government edicts. XPay eliminates that intermediary. If you hold the private keys to your wallet, no one can freeze your funds without your cooperation. Not Musk, not X Corp, not the government. The only way to seize those funds is to physically arrest you and compel you to surrender the keys, which requires individualized law enforcement action rather than bulk administrative freezing. Here is why this matters right now, in February 2026. The traditional banking system is under severe stress. We covered the bank runs in our previous analysis. Over $400 billion withdrawn in 24 hours, regional banks closing, major institutions imposing withdrawal limits. The federal government has responded with emergency liquidity facilities, but that only addresses the symptom. The underlying problem is that depositors have lost confidence. They see commercial real estate collapsing, they see inflation eroding their savings, they see banks using their deposits to make risky bets, and they want out. But where do you go when you do not trust banks? Historically, you move to cash, gold, or treasury bonds. But cash loses value to inflation. Gold is difficult to transact with. And treasury bonds are just another government IOU. What XPay offers is a fourth option. Self-custody digital money that you can transact with as easily as a debit card, but that exists outside the traditional banking system. The government's nightmare scenario is a bank run, where instead of lining up at ATMs to withdraw cash, people simply transfer their bank balances into XPay wallets and then transact in digital assets. In that scenario, the Federal Reserve loses control of the money supply because people are opting out of the dollar system. Banks lose their deposit base and collapse. And capital controls become impossible to enforce because the government cannot freeze decentralized wallets without arresting every single user. That is why the SEC issued the midnight injunction. Not because XPay is breaking securities laws, but because if this continues, the banking system faces an existential crisis and the government loses its ability to implement the capital controls they are preparing. Subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already, because what I am about to show you is the 3 scenarios for how this plays out over the next 72 hours and why all 3 end with either mass financial surveillance or the collapse of the current system. Scenario 1. Musk folds under legal pressure. Over the weekend, X Corp's attorneys negotiate a settlement with the SEC. Musk agrees to implement Know Your Customer protocols, transaction monitoring, and an account freezing mechanism that gives the company the technical ability to comply with government orders. XPay transitions from a decentralized non-custodial wallet to a custodial payment platform that looks and feels decentralized but operates like any other regulated financial service. Users retain convenience but lose sovereignty. The government wins because the exit door is closed. Anyone trying to escape the banking system now moves into a platform that the SEC controls. This is the controlled demolition scenario where financial freedom is gradually regulated away and most users do not notice until it is too late. Scenario 2. Musk refuses and faces prosecution. The Justice Department files criminal charges for obstruction of justice and contempt of court. Federal agents raid XPay server farms in Texas and Nevada. They seize hardware, arrest employees, and attempt to shut down the network. But because Musk distributed the infrastructure internationally, the network continues operating from overseas nodes. The U.S. government blocks XPay within American internet infrastructure, but VPNs and workarounds proliferate. Musk becomes a fugitive or fights the charges from abroad. XPay becomes the symbol of financial resistance, and adoption explodes globally as people see the U.S. government trying to crush a payment system simply because it allows financial autonomy. This is the acceleration scenario where government overreach radicalizes the population and drives millions of people toward alternatives specifically because they have been banned. Scenario 3, the legal battle stalls and the bank run intensifies. Musk fights the injunction in court. The case drags through the judiciary for weeks. During that time, XPay remains operational and transaction volume continues growing. More people see the government trying to shut down a decentralized payment network and conclude that the warnings about capital controls are real. Traditional banks see deposit outflows accelerate. By March, 3 more regional banks fail. The FDIC's insurance fund is depleted. The Federal Reserve is forced to announce unlimited deposit guarantees and emergency liquidity facilities, which is effectively admitting that the banking system is insolvent. The government then goes beyond XPay and announces comprehensive cryptocurrency regulations requiring all digital asset platforms to register as money services businesses with full surveillance and freezing capabilities. Anyone operating outside that framework is criminalized. This is the financial lockdown scenario, where the crisis becomes the justification for total surveillance and control of all money movement. All 3 scenarios end with either financial repression or system collapse. In scenario 1, you lose freedom slowly through regulatory capture. In scenario 2, you lose access to legal payment systems and are forced underground. In scenario 3, the government responds to its own failures by criminalizing alternatives and implementing China-style capital controls. The variable that determines which scenario happens is how many Americans understand what is actually at stake. If people see this as Elon Musk being an unhinged billionaire fighting regulators, they will support the government crackdown. If people understand this is about whether you can move your own money without permission, they will resist. The mainstream media is working hard to make this about Musk's personality rather than the principle of financial sovereignty. That is deliberate. Character assassination is easier than defending why the government needs the power to freeze every American's wealth with an administrative order. What I know for certain right now, at 11:55 p.m. Friday, the SEC filed an emergency injunction ordering X Corp to freeze all XPay decentralized wallets and surrender cryptographic keys to federal authorities. The order cited national security, but the real reason is accelerating bank runs as people flee the traditional financial system. At 1:12 a.m. Saturday, Musk publicly refused, stating XPay does not hold user keys and cannot freeze accounts by design. He dared federal agents to raid the servers. At 2:23 a.m., he revealed the server infrastructure is distributed internationally to prevent single point of failure shutdowns. SEC Chairman Gensler responded by classifying XPay as an unregistered securities exchange subject to compliance mandates. The Justice Department threatened criminal prosecution for obstruction. And XPay transaction volume hit $2.7 billion yesterday, up from $400 million at launch 3 weeks ago, with growth accelerating as traditional banks impose withdrawal limits. This is not a regulatory dispute. This is not a fight between a billionaire and bureaucrats. This is the federal government attempting to criminalize financial alternatives because the existing system is failing and they need to trap capital inside before everyone realizes the banks are insolvent. The midnight injunction proves they are preparing capital controls. Musk's refusal proves those controls can be resisted. And the transaction volume spike proves millions of Americans are already voting with their money by choosing systems the government cannot control. If you cannot move your money without government permission, it is not your money. If the authorities can freeze your account with an administrative order rather than a criminal conviction, you do not have property rights. You have privileges that can be revoked. And if the government responds to banking failures by banning the alternatives rather than fixing the banks, you are living under financial dictatorship. Stay with this channel, turn on notifications. When the Justice Department files charges Monday morning, when Musk posts his next response, when the legal battle escalates, or XPay transaction volumes surge again, you will see the analysis here immediately. This is not over. This is the first battle of the war between digital slavery and financial sovereignty, and whichever side wins will determine whether you own your wealth or whether you merely hold it at the government's pleasure.